My name is Elliot, a 30-year-old graphic designer who recently moved back in with my parents after losing my apartment in the city. Christmas has always been tough with my family, but this year I was hopeful things would be different. My younger brother Austin has always been the golden child, getting the best of everything while I fade into the background. Still, I wrapped my modest gifts with care, believing that maybe this Christmas my parents might finally see me too. Before I tell you what happened that Christmas morning, let me know where you're watching from. Click like and subscribe to join me on this journey that changed my life forever. Art has been my passion since I could hold a crayon. By third grade, my elementary school teachers were calling my parents in to show them my drawings. Mrs. Peterson, my art teacher, even told them I had extraordinary talent for someone so young. I remember sitting in the classroom, legs swinging nervously under my chair as my parents nodded politely, seemingly more concerned about missing their evening shows than my artistic abilities. "That's nice," my father Richard would say, patting me on the head before quickly changing the subject to something he found more practical. "But how are his math scores?" My mother Margaret wasn't much different. "Drawing is a nice hobby, Elliot, but you need real skills to succeed in life," she would remind me every time she found me sketching instead of studying algebra. Despite their lukewarm response to my passion, I continued drawing, finding solace in creating worlds and characters that spoke to me in ways my family never did. I won school competitions, had my work displayed in local libraries, and even earned a small scholarship to a summer art camp when I was 11. My parents skipped the award ceremony, sending my grandmother instead because my father had a golf game he couldn't reschedule. Everything changed dramatically when I turned 12 and Austin was born. From the moment they brought him home, it was as if a spotlight shifted, leaving me in complete darkness. My artwork that once hung on the refrigerator was replaced by Austin's first finger paintings. My achievements became footnotes in family conversations that quickly turned to Austin's latest milestone, no matter how ordinary. "Look, he stacked 3 blocks, my mother would exclaim, calling my father over to witness the apparent genius of their younger son. Meanwhile, my straight A's and art competition trophies gathered dust in my room. "That's expected of you, Elliot," my father would say dismissively when I showed him my report card. The hidden message was clear. "Your achievements aren't special, they're just what you're supposed to do." My teenage years were a study in invisibility. I retreated further into my art, developing my skills and finding community among other creative kids at school who appreciated what my family didn't see. I maintained perfect grades, joined the debate team, and even became yearbook editor, all while watching Austin receive praise for learning to tie his shoes or riding a bike. When college application time came, my parents assumed I would pursue business or law, something practical as my father put it. Their disappointment was palpable when I announced my intention to study graphic design. "That's not a real degree," my father scoffed over dinner. "You might as well major in basket weaving." My mother's approach was more subtle, but equally dismissive. "Honey, we just want you to be able to support yourself. Artists starve, you know." Despite their disapproval, I applied for and received a partial scholarship to a respected art school in New York. I worked 2 jobs to cover the rest, determined to forge my own path. Those 4 years were transformative. For the first time, I was surrounded by people who spoke my language, who saw value in what I could create. I graduated with honors and landed an entry-level position at a boutique design firm in Manhattan. For a few years, everything seemed to be falling into place. I shared a cramped apartment with 2 roommates, worked long hours, and slowly built a portfolio I was proud of. My parents remained distant but seemed somewhat appeased by the fact that I was supporting myself. Then the economic downturn hit, and my firm cut half its staff, including me. After 3 months of searching for work in an increasingly competitive market, my savings depleted, and I faced the humiliating prospect of moving back home at 30. My parents agreed, though not without reminding me that this would have never happened if I'd chosen a stable career. The past 3 months living under their roof had been an exercise in restraint. My father, Richard, now retired from his banking career, found every opportunity to mention Austin's academic achievements at the prestigious State University, where he was now a freshman, studying business finance on a partial scholarship. Austin's professor says he has a natural mind for numbers. He would announce at dinner, unprompted. Says he could work for any investment firm in the country when he graduates. My mother, Margaret, still working part-time as a real estate agent, was more subtle but equally effective in her comparisons. I showed a house to a lovely couple today. She would begin innocently. The husband is a graphic designer like you, Elliot. They can't afford much, poor things. But they're young and hopeful. The subtext was always clear. This is your future, disappointing and financially insecure because of your choices. The week before Christmas, tension in the house escalated as Austin returned home from his first semester at college. He arrived with the expected excellent grades and stories of social triumphs that my parents absorbed like oxygen. "Tell Elliot about the business club you joined," my mother prompted during dinner, beaming with pride. Austin launched into a detailed account of networking with visiting executives while I silently ate my pot roast, invisible once again. At 28, Austin had already surpassed me in our parents' eyes, following the path they had always wanted for both of us. Despite the dynamics, I had carefully selected Christmas gifts for everyone within my limited budget. For my father, a rare first edition of a mystery novel by his favorite author, found after weeks of searching online. For my mother, a handcrafted scarf from an artisan I had worked with in New York. For Austin, premium headphones he had been mentioning for his gaming sessions. I wrapped each with care, adding hand-drawn gift tags with personalized illustrations for each recipient. As Christmas approached, I allowed myself a small hope that perhaps the holiday spirit might soften the family dynamics. Perhaps my thoughtful gifts would remind them that I had value to offer, even if it wasn't in the currency they preferred. Perhaps, for just one day, we could be a family that appreciated each member equally. How naive I was. Christmas Eve in our household followed its usual traditions. My mother spent the day cooking, preparing her famous honey-glazed ham and sweet potato casserole. I offered to help, rolling up my sleeves to peel potatoes and chop vegetables, while Austin lounged in the living room, playing video games on his laptop. "Austin needs to rest after his difficult semester," my mother explained when I pointed out the uneven distribution of labor. "College is very demanding these days." I bit my tongue, choosing not to mention my own 60-hour work weeks at the marketing firm where I'd finally secured a position after moving back. The pay was modest, but I was slowly rebuilding my portfolio with local clients. That evening, we attended the neighborhood Christmas party, where my parents proudly introduced Austin to everyone as our son, the business major, while I trailed behind, occasionally acknowledged as our older son without mention of my career or accomplishments. By the time we returned home, I had a dull headache from forcing smiles and pretending the oversight didn't sting. I went to bed early, arranging my carefully wrapped gifts under the tree before heading upstairs. Through the wall, I could hear my parents in Austin's room, their voices animated as they discussed his plans for the next semester. No one had asked about my plans or goals in weeks. Christmas morning dawned bright and cold. I woke early, made coffee for everyone, and waited in the living room for the rest of the family to emerge. My mother appeared first, her face lighting up when she saw the coffee. "How thoughtful, Elliot," she said, the rare praise warming me briefly. My father and Austin came downstairs together, deep in conversation about some business news story they'd both been following. We gathered around the tree, the fire crackling in the background, Christmas music playing softly. This was the moment I had been anticipating with equal parts hope and dread. "Let's have Austin open the first gift," my father suggested, as he did every year. I watched as Austin tore through package after package, designer clothes from our parents. "For your internship interviews next summer," my mother explained. "An expensive watch from our grandparents. New gaming equipment from cousins." Each gift was met with appropriate enthusiasm from my brother and beaming pride from my parents. Then came the big moment. My father handed Austin a small, expertly wrapped box with a knowing smile. Austin opened it and let out a whoop of excitement, pulling out the latest iPhone model, the one released just months ago with a price tag equivalent to a month's rent on my old apartment. "You've earned it," Mom said proudly, clasping her hands together. "Your grades were so outstanding this semester. We couldn't be prouder," my father added, clapping Austin on the shoulder. "This will help you stay connected with all those important business contacts you're making." Austin immediately began exploring the features, my parents leaning in to admire the device as if it were a newborn baby. I sat quietly, waiting for the focus to shift. Eventually, it did. "Elliot, here's something for you," my mother said, handing me a small, lightweight package wrapped in leftover paper from last year. I carefully unwrapped it, conscious of 3 pairs of eyes on me. Inside was a spiral notebook from the dollar store, the kind with a cardboard cover and thin pages, along with a cheap ballpoint pen. The price sticker was still visible on the back, $1.29. "You like to draw, don't you?" my mother said, as if she wasn't quite sure, as if my lifelong passion was a vague hobby I'd mentioned once in passing. I took out the pen and tried to write a thank you note on the first page of the notebook. The pen sputtered, leaving faint, broken lines before stopping altogether. I shook it, tried again. Nothing. My father snickered. Quality control must have been on break. Austin laughed outright, still cradling his new iPhone. "Maybe Santa thought you were naughty this year, bro." I forced a smile, the muscles in my face straining with the effort. "Thanks. It's always good to have a notebook around." I carefully set it aside and reached for the gifts I had brought, changing the subject. "I have some things for you all, too." The rest of the gift exchange passed in a blur. My carefully selected presents were received with polite but minimal appreciation. My father glanced at the rare book and said, "Interesting," before setting it aside. My mother complimented the scarf but immediately pointed out it didn't match any of her outfits. Austin gave the headphones a cursory inspection before returning to his iPhone. The Christmas dinner that followed was equally painful. The conversation revolved entirely around Austin's achievements and plans, his grades, his professor's praise, his potential internships, his new iPhone features. "Did you know it has triple cameras?" Austin explained, holding up the device at the dinner table. "The image processing is insane." "No phones at the table," my mother said mildly, before immediately contradicting herself. "But first, show us that photo app you were talking about." I picked at my food, feeling increasingly invisible. When I attempted to mention a new project at work, my father interrupted to ask Austin about his economics professor's background. The message couldn't have been clearer if they'd written it on the wall. "Your life and accomplishments don't matter to us." I excused myself early, claiming a headache, which wasn't entirely untrue. In my childhood bedroom, now stripped of most of my personality and decorated as a generic guest room, I sat on the edge of the bed holding the useless notebook and non-functional pen. They symbolized exactly how my parents viewed me and my chosen path. Worthless. That night, sleep eluded me completely. I lay awake staring at the ceiling, the events of the day replaying in my mind like a particularly painful movie. The notebook and dead pen sat on the nightstand, mundane objects that somehow embodied years of dismissal and disappointment. As the hours ticked by, memories surfaced from the depths of my mind. My 10th birthday, when I'd asked for art supplies and received a calculator instead. My high school art show, where I'd won first place, but my parents had skipped to attend Austin's t-ball game. My college graduation, where they'd arrived late and left early, complaining about the parking situation. Each memory was a small cut, and together they formed a wound that had never properly healed. By morning, my eyes were gritty from lack of sleep, but something had solidified within me. I showered and dressed, then headed downstairs to find my parents and Austin already at breakfast, gathered around Austin's iPhone as he demonstrated some new feature. "Good morning," I said, pouring myself coffee. No one responded. Austin continued his demonstration, my parents enraptured by whatever he was showing them. "And the face recognition is crazy accurate," Austin was saying. "It works even in low light. Such incredible technology," my father marveled. "Worth every penny for a serious student like you." I sat down with my coffee, invisible as usual. Minutes passed before my mother noticed me. "Oh, Elliot, there's cereal in the pantry if you want some." "Thanks," I said flatly. After breakfast, I retreated to my room and tried to use the notebook they'd given me, thinking perhaps I could at least sketch something to distract myself. The pages were thin and rough, the kind that tear easily and absorb ink poorly. The pen, as I'd discovered yesterday, didn't work at all. I tried wetting the tip, scribbling to get it started, even taking it apart to check the ink cartridge. Nothing helped. My phone buzzed with a text from Brandon, a coworker who had become a friend since I started at the marketing firm. "How's the family Christmas going?" he asked. I hesitated, then typed out the truth about the iPhone versus notebook situation. His response came quickly. "That's messed up, man. You deserve better." We exchanged several more messages, with me revealing more about the pattern of favoritism that had defined my family dynamics for years. Brandon's outrage on my behalf was validating. Someone else could see how wrong this was. "You know you can crash at my place if you need to get out of there," Brandon offered. "I've got a spare room since my roommate moved out last month." The offer hung in my mind as I sat in the quiet of my room. Could I really just leave? Walk away from my family, even temporarily? The thought was both terrifying and exhilarating. I heard laughter from downstairs. Austin must have said something amusing. Then my father's voice. "That's my boy, sharp as a tack." The casual praise, so easily given to Austin and so thoroughly withheld from me, made something twist painfully in my chest. I got up and opened my closet, pushing aside the hanging clothes to reach the back corner. There, in an old portfolio case I'd brought with me when I moved home, were drawings from my childhood and teen years. Work I'd been proud of, that teachers had praised, that had won competitions. Work my parents had never displayed or even mentioned after the initial polite acknowledgement. As I flipped through the pages, a decision crystallized in my mind. I had been seeking validation from people fundamentally incapable of giving it to me. No achievement, no success would ever be enough to make them see me as they saw Austin. The problem wasn't my worth. It was their inability to recognize it. I pulled my suitcase from under the bed and began packing methodically. Clothes, toiletries, my laptop, and professional equipment. The portfolio of childhood art and my current work samples. Essential documents. I worked quietly and efficiently, a strange calm settling over me. When the suitcase was packed, I sat at the small desk and wrote a note on a piece of printer paper, since the notebook they'd given me was unusable. "Mom, Dad, and Austin, I'm taking some time away to think about what family means and what I need in my life right now. The disparity in how you treat Austin and me has become too painful to ignore, as evidenced by yesterday's gifts and countless other incidents. I'm not angry, just finally accepting what I've known for years but been afraid to acknowledge. I'll be staying with a friend. I'm safe, so please don't worry. I'll reach out when I'm ready to talk. Elliot." I folded the note and placed it on my made bed. Then I took one last look around the room that had never really felt like mine since I'd returned home. There was nothing more to say or do. I picked up my suitcase, laptop bag, and portfolio, and quietly made my way downstairs. My family was in the living room, watching a holiday movie. Austin was texting on his new iPhone. My father was dozing, and my mother was only half watching the film while scrolling through her tablet. No one looked up as I passed the doorway. It was fitting, somehow, departing as invisibly as I had existed in this house. I slipped out the front door, loaded my car, and drove away from the house that had never truly been a home. Brandon lived in a modest two-bedroom apartment about 40 minutes from my parents' house, in a neighborhood filled with young professionals and graduate students. When I arrived with my hastily packed bags, he welcomed me without question. "Mi casa es su casa," he said, helping me bring my things inside. "Spare room's small, but it's yours as long as you need it." The room was indeed small, just enough space for a twin bed, a dresser, and a compact desk, but it felt more welcoming than the larger, emptier space I'd left behind. Brandon had cleared the closet and put fresh sheets on the bed, small gestures that spoke volumes about his character. "I figured you might be coming, after those texts," he explained, setting down my laptop bag. "Nobody deserves to be treated like that, especially not by family." That first night, we ordered pizza and talked for hours. Brandon listened as I unpacked not just my bags but years of emotional baggage as well. He didn't offer platitudes or try to fix the situation. He just provided the space for me to process everything I was feeling: relief, guilt, sadness, anger, and beneath it all, a tentative sense of liberation. "You know what's messed up?" I said, halfway through my second beer. "Part of me still feels like I'm overreacting, like maybe I should have just accepted the notebook and kept quiet." Brandon shook his head firmly. "That's what happens when you spend your whole life being told your feelings don't matter. You start to believe it." The next morning, my phone showed 6 missed calls from my mother and 3 from my father. There was a single text from Austin. "Drama queen much? Mom's freaking out." I silenced my phone and focused instead on setting up a workstation in Brandon's spare room. I had projects due after the holiday break, and immersing myself in design work had always been my most effective coping mechanism. By afternoon, I had transformed the small desk into a functional workspace with my laptop, tablet, and essential tools arranged efficiently. The familiar routine of opening files, checking deadlines, and reviewing client feedback grounded me in a way nothing else could. "I'm heading out to meet some friends for drinks," Brandon said, popping his head in the doorway. "Want to join? They're good people, mostly from the advertising world." My instinct was to decline, to hide away, until I'd processed everything. But something made me reconsider. Actually, yeah, that would be nice. The bar was a cozy place with exposed brick walls and vintage advertising posters framed as artwork, right up my alley professionally. Brandon's friends turned out to be an eclectic mix of creative types: a copywriter, 2 UX designers, a social media manager, and Jennifer, who managed a small local art gallery. "Brandon's told us you're a graphic designer," Jennifer said, sliding into the seat next to me. "Any work I might have seen?" The question was asked with genuine interest, so different from the dismissive way my family inquired about my career. I showed her some projects on my phone, including a recent brand identity I'd developed for a local coffee shop. "This is really good work," she said, studying the images closely. "You have a distinctive style, clean but with these subtle artistic touches. Have you ever considered showing your more personal work in a gallery setting?" The question caught me off guard. My personal art had always been just that, personal, a private outlet separate from my commercial design work. "Not really," I admitted. "I don't know if it's gallery material." "I'd love to see it sometime," Jennifer said. "The line between commercial and fine art is more fluid than most people think." The evening continued, conversation flowing easily among people who spoke my language and valued the skills my family had always dismissed. For the first time in months, maybe years, I felt seen and heard. A week passed, and I still hadn't responded to my family's messages. The calls had become less frequent, though my mother had left increasingly emotional voicemails, ranging from worried to angry to guilt-inducing. I listened to each one, but wasn't ready to engage. I needed this space, this time to remember who I was outside of their narrow perception. At work, something unexpected happened. My boss, Michael, called me into his office to discuss a branding project I'd completed just before Christmas. "The client is extremely pleased," he said, sliding the approved designs across his desk. "Said it was exactly what they'd been trying to articulate but couldn't. That's rare feedback, Elliot." The praise was simple but sincere, and it landed differently than any compliment I'd received before. This wasn't patronizing or qualified with comparison. It was straightforward recognition of my skill and contribution. "I'd like you to take point on the Harrington account," Michael continued. "It's bigger than what you've handled so far, but I think you're ready." The Harrington account was a local manufacturing company undergoing a complete rebrand, the kind of project that could significantly boost my portfolio and reputation. "Thank you for the opportunity," I said, meaning it deeply. Back at Brandon's, I found myself with renewed creative energy. After finishing my client work each day, I began creating personal pieces in a style I hadn't explored since art school, mixed media works combining digital elements with traditional techniques. I worked late into the night, not from obligation, but from genuine inspiration. Brandon would occasionally look in on me, bringing coffee or offering feedback. "This is the real you," he commented one evening, looking at a series I was developing. "Not the guy who was trying to make himself smaller to fit into that house." In quiet moments, I reflected on his words and realized their truth. I had been compressing myself, limiting my expression, even subconsciously adjusting my posture to take up less space, all in a futile attempt to be acceptable to people who couldn't appreciate what I actually had to offer. One evening, Jennifer texted Brandon, asking if he wanted to join some friends at an art opening downtown. He extended the invitation to me. "You should come," he encouraged. "Networking, free wine, looking at art instead of making it for a change. It'll be good for you." At the gallery, surrounded by local artists and appreciators, I found myself engaged in conversations about technique, influence, and creative vision, discussions my family would have found pointless or pretentious, but that nourished something essential in me. Jennifer introduced me to several artists and collectors, casually mentioning my work in a way that prompted genuine interest rather than polite dismissal. By the end of the evening, I had 3 new professional connections and an invitation to submit work for consideration in an upcoming show featuring local artists. Walking back to Brandon's apartment that night, I felt a lightness that had been absent for too long. "I think I'm going to start looking for my own place," I told him. "It's time." Brandon nodded. "You're always welcome here, but yeah, I think that would be good for you. New space, new chapter." For the first time since Christmas, I checked my social media accounts. There were messages from old art school friends, colleagues from New York, and even a few potential clients who had found my portfolio online. The world outside my family's narrow perspective was vast and full of possibilities I'd forgotten existed. I realized with startling clarity that I'd been living as if my parents' evaluation of my worth was the only one that mattered, when in reality, it was perhaps the least informed and least relevant to my actual life and work. That night, I slept soundly for the first time since leaving home. The knock came on a Saturday afternoon, almost 2 weeks after I'd walked out of my parents' house. Brandon and I were having coffee and discussing plans to look at a potential apartment I'd found online when the insistent rapping on the door interrupted our conversation. Brandon peeked through the peephole and turned to me with raised eyebrows. "It's your family, all 3 of them." My stomach dropped, but I nodded. "I should talk to them." "Want me to make myself scarce?" Brandon offered. I shook my head. "No. Stay, please." Brandon opened the door to reveal my parents standing stiffly in the hallway, with Austin half a step behind them, eyes glued to his iPhone. My mother looked like she hadn't slept well. My father's face was set in stern lines, and Austin appeared thoroughly bored by the whole situation. "Elliot," my mother said, her voice wavering between relief and accusation. "You had us worried sick." "I left a note," I replied evenly. "And I responded to your texts to let you know I was safe." "After 3 days," she exclaimed. 3 days of not knowing if you were dead in a ditch somewhere." Brandon cleared his throat. "Please come in. I'm Brandon, Elliot's friend and colleague." They filed into the small living room, my father assessing the apartment with barely concealed judgment, my mother perching anxiously on the edge of the sofa, and Austin finally pocketing his phone to look around. "Nice place," he said with faint sarcasm, taking in the modest furnishings. An awkward silence descended. I realized they expected me to explain myself, to apologize for disrupting their holiday and causing concern. Instead, I asked, "How did you find me?" "Your work," my father answered gruffly. "We called when you didn't come home. They said you were still employed but wouldn't give your new address. We waited outside after your shift yesterday and followed you here." The fact that they had essentially stalked me rather than simply asking to meet was telling. Control, not connection, was their priority. "Elliot, this has gone on long enough," my mother said, dabbing at her eyes with a tissue. "Whatever point you're trying to make, you've made it. It's time to come home and stop this foolishness." "I'm not trying to make a point, Mom," I said quietly. "I'm trying to take care of myself." "By running away? By worrying your mother to the point of needing medication to sleep?" My father interjected, voice rising. "By embarrassing the family in front of the neighbors who've seen your car gone?" "I'm sorry if you were worried," I said sincerely. "That wasn't my intention, but I needed space to think, and I didn't leave without explanation." "A cryptic note is hardly an explanation," my father scoffed. "I thought it was pretty clear, actually," I countered, feeling a strange calm despite the tension in the room. The Christmas gifts were just the final straw in a lifetime of being treated as less important, less valuable than Austin. That's ridiculous, my mother protested. We've always treated you both the same. Mom, I said gently, you gave Austin the latest iPhone and me a dollar store notebook with a pen that didn't even work. Dad laughed about it. Austin laughed too. How is that treating us the same? You're an adult, Elliot, my father said dismissively. Austin is still in school. He needs more support right now. I was never given that support. Even when I was in school, I pointed out. My art education was always treated as a waste of time and money, while you've celebrated every step of Austin's business degree. Because business is practical, my father exclaimed. It leads to stability, to a real career. I have a real career, I said firmly. I'm a professional designer with clients who value my work enough to pay for it. Just because you don't understand or appreciate what I do doesn't make it any less legitimate. Austin, who had been quiet until now, chimed in. Come on, bro. You're making a mountain out of a molehill, so you got a notebook for Christmas. Big deal. I turned to him. It's not about the notebook, Austin. It's about what it represents. Years of differential treatment, of my passions being dismissed while yours are celebrated, of me being an afterthought in my own family. That's simply not true, my mother insisted, tears forming. We're proud of both our sons. When was the last time you said that to me? I asked. When was the last time you asked about my work with genuine interest? When was the last time you displayed anything I've created or mentioned my achievements to friends or family? Their silence was answer enough. Brandon, who had been quietly observing, spoke up. If I may, I've only known Elliot for a few months, but it's clear he's incredibly talented and hardworking. The clients at our firm specifically request him because his work speaks to people. That's a rare gift. My father turned to Brandon with narrowed eyes. With all due respect, this is a family matter. My name is Elliot, a 30-year-old graphic designer who recently moved back in with my parents after losing my apartment in the city. Christmas has always been tough with my family, but this year I was hopeful things would be different. My younger brother Austin has always been the golden child, getting the best of everything while I fade into the background. Still, I wrapped my modest gifts with care, believing that maybe this Christmas my parents might finally see me too. How dare you, my mother gasped. We've given Elliot everything, except recognition, I said softly. Except the basic respect of treating my career and passions as valid choices rather than disappointments. My father stood abruptly. I think we're done here. Elliot, either you come home with us now and end this ridiculous drama, or, he paused, issuing what he clearly thought was an ultimatum that would bring me to heel, or don't bother coming back at all. I looked at him, really looked at the man who had shaped so much of my self-perception through his constant disapproval. In that moment, I saw not an imposing authority figure, but a rigid, limited person, unable to value anything outside his narrow definition of success. I'm sorry you feel that way, Dad, I said, standing to meet his gaze. I hope someday you can appreciate me for who I am, not who you wanted me to be, but I won't be coming home today. I respect myself too much to return to a situation where I'm consistently devalued. My mother began to cry in earnest, while Austin looked genuinely surprised that his big brother wasn't folding under pressure as expected. This isn't over, my father said tightly, moving toward the door. Margaret, Austin, we're leaving. My mother hesitated, looking torn between my father's command and some maternal instinct finally kicking in. Elliot, please. I love you, Mom, I said honestly. All of you. But I need to love myself too. She allowed my father to guide her to the door, Austin following with a backwards glance that held something I couldn't quite identify. Confusion, perhaps, or the first glimmer of understanding that our family dynamic wasn't as healthy as he'd been raised to believe. After they left, Brandon and I sat in silence for several minutes, processing what had just occurred. That was intense, he finally said. You okay? I considered the question carefully. My hands were shaking slightly, and there was an ache in my chest, but underneath was something unexpected, relief. I think I will be, I answered truthfully. For the first time in a long time, I think I actually will be. You stood your ground, Brandon observed. Not with anger or accusations, but with dignity. That's not easy. That night, I sat at the small desk in Brandon's spare room and opened my laptop. Instead of checking client emails or social media, I navigated to apartment listings and began searching in earnest. It was time to create a space that was truly mine, where my work and my worth weren't constantly questioned or diminished. The pain of the confrontation was real, but so was the strange sense of freedom that came with finally speaking my truth after years of silent acceptance. I had walked away from the false security of family approval and toward something far more valuable: self-respect. 2 months after the confrontation with my family, my life had transformed in ways I couldn't have imagined that Christmas morning. I had moved into a small but bright one-bedroom apartment in an arts-friendly neighborhood downtown. The rent stretched my budget, but the large windows providing natural light for my work made it worthwhile. My position at the marketing firm had solidified, with the Harrington rebrand receiving excellent feedback and leading to referrals for additional projects. I had also begun building a modest freelance business on the side, specializing in brand identity for small local businesses that couldn't afford large agencies. One evening, my phone rang with Jennifer's name on the display. "Elliot, I've been looking at those portfolio pieces you shared," she said without preamble. "I want to include 3 of your works in a small exhibition we're planning. Local artists, mixed media focus. Are you interested?" My heart raced. A real gallery exhibition, something I had dreamed about in art school but had eventually filed away as unlikely. "Absolutely," I managed to say. "When would this be?" "Opening night is in 3 weeks," she replied. "Can you come by the gallery tomorrow to discuss details?" The following weeks were a whirlwind of preparation. I selected 3 pieces from my recent personal work, mixed media explorations of identity and perception that felt uncomfortably relevant to my own journey. Jennifer helped me understand pricing, framing options, and the logistics of exhibition. "These are really compelling," she said, examining the pieces in my apartment. "There's vulnerability here, but also strength. They communicate something authentic." I worked long hours, balancing my day job with preparations for the exhibition and ongoing freelance projects. The exhaustion was different from what I'd experienced living with my parents. It was productive fatigue, the tiredness that comes from pursuing something meaningful, rather than from constantly defending your worth. Brandon became a regular visitor to my new place, often bringing takeout and forcing me to take breaks. "You need to eat something that isn't coffee," he would say, unpacking containers of Thai food or pizza. "The starving artist thing is just a stereotype, not a requirement." The night before the exhibition, I stood in my living room looking at the remaining works I hadn't selected for the show. Each piece reflected some aspect of my journey: the constraints I'd lived under, the breakthrough moments, the gradual reclaiming of my voice and vision. My phone buzzed with a text from Austin. "Heard you've got some art thing tomorrow. Sounds cool." It was the first communication from any family member since the confrontation. No mention of how he'd heard about the exhibition. No indication if he or our parents might attend. Just a brief acknowledgement that seemed both casual and significant. I replied simply, "Thanks. 7 p.m. at Westside Gallery if you're interested." The day of the exhibition arrived with perfect spring weather. The gallery looked transformed when I arrived for final preparations. White walls spotlighting each piece, subtle lighting enhancing colors and textures, my name printed neatly beside my work. Jennifer had positioned my pieces in a prominent location near the entrance, giving them exceptional visibility. "We're expecting a good turnout," she told me, adjusting the angle of one frame. "Local arts critic from the Tribune confirmed, plus some collectors I specifically invited because your style might interest them." My stomach fluttered with nervous anticipation. This wasn't a school show or a coffee shop display. This was a legitimate gallery exhibition with potential professional implications. By 6:30, people began arriving. Brandon came early, bringing several colleagues from our firm, including my boss Michael, who seemed genuinely impressed by my work outside the commercial context. "You've been hiding some serious talent, Elliot," he commented, studying one of my pieces. "This depth doesn't always get to shine through in client work." The gallery filled steadily. I circulated as Jennifer had advised, answering questions about my technique and inspiration, trying not to hover anxiously near my displayed works. It was surreal to hear strangers discussing my art, pointing out elements I'd incorporated deliberately and others I hadn't consciously intended. Around 8 o'clock, I was speaking with an elderly couple interested in local artists when I noticed a tall, distinguished man studying my largest piece with intense focus. Jennifer appeared at my elbow, whispering excitedly, "That's Lawrence Sheldon from the Meridian Gallery in New York. He rarely comes to local shows. I'm going to introduce you." Lawrence turned out to be a soft-spoken man with insightful questions about my creative process and influences. "There's something distinctive happening in your integration of digital and traditional elements," he observed. "It feels relevant to our current moment. The tension between analog and digital experience." By the end of our conversation, he had given me his card with a handwritten note to contact him about possibly showing work in a themed exhibition he was curating for the fall. "New voices addressing technology and identity," he explained. "Your perspective would be valuable." As the evening progressed, I gradually became aware of someone watching me from near the entrance. Turning between conversations, I caught a glimpse of Austin standing awkwardly by himself, looking both out of place and determined to be there. I excused myself from the group I was speaking with and approached him. "You came," I said simply. Austin shrugged, hands in his pockets. "Wanted to see what all the fuss was about." He gestured vaguely toward my displayed works. "These are actually pretty good. I mean, I don't know much about art, but they make you think, you know?" Coming from Austin, this was extraordinary praise. "Thanks for coming," I said, meaning it. "Are Mom and Dad?" He shook his head. "They don't know I'm here. Dad's still pretty pissed, and Mom just gets upset whenever your name comes up." He hesitated, then added, "But I think they're starting to realize they handled things badly." We stood in awkward silence for a moment before Austin continued, "That guy you were just talking to, the older one in the fancy jacket, he seemed really into your work. He runs a gallery in New York," I explained. "He's interested in including some of my pieces in an exhibition there." Austin's eyebrows shot up. "Seriously? That's huge, right?" "It could be," I acknowledged. Jennifer appeared with a journalist in tow, wanting an introduction. I turned to Austin. "I need to do this interview. Will you stay a bit longer?" "Nah, I should get going. Got an early class tomorrow." He shifted uncomfortably, then added, "But this was cool. Your stuff is really good, Elliot. For real." It wasn't a full reconciliation, but it was something, an acknowledgement from at least one family member that my path had legitimate value. The exhibition was a modest success by objective standards. I sold 2 pieces, received positive mention in the local arts column, and made connections with several potential clients and collectors. But its true value was more personal. Standing in that gallery surrounded by people engaging thoughtfully with my work, I felt a validation that no family approval could match. The following week, riding the momentum from the exhibition, I signed a lease on a new apartment, not just a place to live, but a true studio space with a separate area designated for creating art. The rent was manageable thanks to my growing freelance client list, and the location was perfect. A converted industrial building with high ceilings and expansive windows. On moving day, Brandon and several friends from work helped transport my modest belongings and additional art supplies I'd purchased in anticipation of the increased space. We ordered pizza and christened the new studio with beer and impromptu design critiques of the delivery boxes. "To new beginnings," Brandon toasted, raising his bottle, "and to finding your people." Looking around at the half-unpacked boxes, blank walls waiting for my vision, and friends who valued what I created, I realized I had finally found my place, not by changing myself to fit someone else's expectations, but by creating a space where my authentic self could flourish. That night, after everyone had left, I stood alone in my new studio. The emptiness felt not like absence, but like possibility, a canvas awaiting the first decisive stroke. I set up my workstation, arranged my materials, and for the first time in years, felt completely at home. 3 months after the gallery exhibition, my professional life had settled into a satisfying rhythm. My work at the marketing firm continued, now with increased responsibilities and creative input. My freelance business had grown steadily, with a wait list forming for brand identity projects. Lawrence from the Meridian Gallery had confirmed my inclusion in his upcoming exhibition, necessitating the creation of 2 new pieces specifically for the show. Life in my studio apartment felt right, the space gradually taking on my personality through carefully selected furnishings, artwork from friends, and the organized creative chaos of ongoing projects. I had dinner regularly with Brandon and our widening circle of friends, attended gallery openings with Jennifer, and even started teaching a weekend workshop on digital illustration at the local arts center. On a rainy Tuesday morning, my phone rang with my mother's number. We had exchanged a few brief, cautious texts since Austin's appearance at my exhibition, but no actual conversation. My stomach tightened as I answered. "Elliot?" Her voice sounded strained. "It's your father. He's in the hospital." My breath caught. "What happened? Is he okay?" "A minor heart episode," she explained. "The doctor says it's a warning sign, not a full heart attack. But he'll need to make some lifestyle changes." I closed my eyes, absorbing the information. Despite everything, the thought of my father in a hospital bed sent a wave of concern through me. "Which hospital?" "I'll come." The hospital was a 40-minute drive from my studio. I rescheduled an afternoon client meeting and headed there immediately, thoughts churning. Our last interaction had been the confrontation at Brandon's apartment, ending with my father's ultimatum. I had no idea what to expect or how he would receive my presence. The hospital corridor was antiseptically bright, nurses moving efficiently between rooms. My mother stood when she saw me approach the waiting area, her face showing relief and uncertainty. "Thank you for coming," she said, awkwardly accepting my brief hug. "He's stable. They're running some tests." Austin arrived minutes after me, his usual confident demeanor subdued by the hospital environment. He nodded at me, a silent acknowledgement that we were temporarily united by concern for our father. When we were finally allowed to visit, I entered the room with trepidation. My father looked smaller somehow, lying in the hospital bed with monitoring wires attached to his chest. His complexion was gray, his expression uncharacteristically vulnerable. "Elliot," he said, surprise evident in his voice. "You came." "Of course I did," I replied simply, standing at the foot of his bed. An awkward silence followed, filled only by the steady beep of monitoring equipment. My father cleared his throat. "The doctors say I need to reduce stress. Apparently banking retirement isn't as relaxing as I'd hoped." It was as close to humor as my father typically came. I offered a small smile. "What's the prognosis?" "Diet changes, exercise, medication." He waved dismissively, though the gesture lacked his usual authority. "They're keeping me overnight for observation, just being cautious." We talked carefully around the edges of meaningful topics: his health, the hospital food, Austin's spring semester courses. My mother watched our strained interaction with worried eyes, occasionally filling silences with nervous chatter about neighbors or distant relatives. Before leaving, I found myself briefly alone with my father, while my mother and Austin went to the cafeteria. In the quiet room, he seemed to struggle with something before finally speaking. "Your mother visited that gallery, after your show, saw your work." The admission clearly cost him effort. She said it was impressive. I hadn't known this. "Thank you for telling me." He nodded once, then turned to look out the window, our brief moment of connection complete but significant. After my father's release from the hospital, I expected to return to our previous state of minimal contact. Instead, my mother called and tentatively invited me to dinner the following weekend. "Nothing formal," she hastened to add. "Just family. If you're available." I agreed with equal caution, and found myself pulling into the driveway of my childhood home for the first time since walking out on Christmas night. The house looked exactly the same, but my perception of it had fundamentally changed. It was now a place I was visiting rather than a place that defined me. Dinner was a subdued affair. My father, still recovering, was quieter than usual. Austin made efforts at normal conversation, asking about my recent projects with what seemed like genuine interest. My mother had prepared all my favorite foods from childhood, a peace offering of sorts. "Elliot has work in a New York gallery show next month," Austin announced during dessert, filling a silence. "The Meridian Gallery. It's apparently a big deal." My parents looked at me with matching expressions of surprise. "New York?" my mother repeated. "That's wonderful." It's just a group exhibition, I said modestly. But yes, it's a good opportunity. My father cleared his throat. Your brother mentioned you're doing well with your design business. I am, I confirmed. The marketing firm just promoted me to senior designer, and my freelance client list keeps growing. That's good, he said awkwardly. Stability is important. It wasn't enthusiastic praise, but coming from my father, the acknowledgement that my career could provide stability was significant progress. After dinner, my mother insisted on showing me recent changes to the house. New curtains, a repainted guest bathroom, updated kitchen appliances. In my old room, now fully converted to a generic guest space, she paused. I saved your childhood things, she said hesitantly. The artwork, school projects, they're in boxes in the attic. I thought you might want them someday. The revelation that she had preserved these pieces of my history, even while removing traces of me from the visible spaces of the house, was complicated. Thank you, I said. I'd like to look through them sometime. In a quiet moment as I was preparing to leave, my mother followed me to the front door. I didn't understand, she said suddenly. Your art, your choices, I still don't fully understand them, but I should have tried harder. It wasn't quite an apology, but it was an acknowledgement, the first step toward something new. I'd like to see your apartment sometime, she added, if that would be all right. I'd like that, I replied, surprised to find I meant it. Over the following months, a tentative new relationship began to form with my family. My mother visited my studio apartment, admiring the space and asking questions about my work with awkward but sincere interest. My father remained more distant but made small efforts, forwarding an article about a successful graphic design firm, inquiring about my financial planning. Austin, perhaps because of his youth or his witnessing of my professional validation, adapted most readily to our changing family dynamic. He occasionally texted me design questions for his business school projects or shared campus stories that didn't revolve around his achievements. The transformation wasn't dramatic or complete. My parents still didn't fully understand or value my creative path as they did Austin's more conventional one. But there was a new respect in their interactions with me, a recognition that my choices, while different from their expectations, had led to legitimate success and fulfillment. For my part, I came to understand my parents' limitations without being defined by them. Their inability to appreciate my artistic talents wasn't a reflection of my worth, but of their own narrow perspective. I could accept their flawed love without requiring it to validate my choices. 6 months after the Christmas notebook incident, I visited my parents' house again, this time bringing professionally framed prints of 3 of my most successful pieces, ones that had received recognition and sold to collectors. These are for you, I said simply, presenting the carefully wrapped package. If you'd like to have them. My mother unwrapped them with unusual care, studying each piece before passing it to my father. They're beautiful, Elliot, she said, her voice genuine. The colors, the movement. I can see why people respond to your work. My father examined them with the serious attention he typically reserved for financial statements. These sold? People paid good money for these? Yes, Dad, I confirmed, hiding my amusement at his persistent focus on monetary validation. The originals sold for a substantial amount. He nodded, seemingly reassessing his understanding of my career. Where should we hang them, Margaret? The question, the assumption that they would display my work in their home rather than relegating it to a box in the attic, was perhaps the most meaningful acknowledgement he could offer. Later that evening, sitting on the patio with a cold drink, I reflected on the journey from that Christmas morning to the present. The painful gift of a useless notebook had ultimately been a catalyst, forcing me to confront the pattern of dismissal I had accepted for too long and pushing me toward authentic self-validation. I had discovered that walking away wasn't an act of anger, but an act of self-preservation. Sometimes distance is necessary to gain perspective, to remember who you are beyond others' limited perception of you. And sometimes that distance allows not just personal growth, but the possibility of healthier connections when you're ready to bridge the gap again. The notebook still sat in my studio drawer, a reminder not of hurt but of transformation. Next to it lay the first check I'd received for a sold artwork, framed not for display, but for personal significance. Together, they bookended a chapter of my life when I'd finally learned that external validation, while pleasant, was nothing compared to the power of recognizing my own worth. Have you ever had to walk away from someone or something to preserve your self-worth? It's one of the hardest decisions we face, but sometimes the most necessary. Share your story in the comments below. If this resonated with you, please like and subscribe to hear more stories about finding strength in difficult family dynamics. And remember, sometimes the path to healing isn't in trying to change others, but in recognizing your own value regardless of whether they ever do. Thank you for listening, and I wish you the courage to honor yourself in all your relationships.